Hello, everyone. Welcome to an exciting a new episode of Policy and Profits. I am Anthony Esposito with Ascalon 6 Capital, joined as always by EJ Antoni, Chief Economist at the Heritage Foundation. EJ, how are you?
Anthony, I am hanging in another crazy week of econ data, all kinds of great stuff. A bit all over the map, but we got some really good jobs numbers today. So things are looking up on the whole. Not to say everything's good. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. But we've talked about this before. Even I am surprised at how much good progress we've made this year, and how much things are looking up compared to where we were, at the end of last year, for example.
Yeah, we kept talking about, and I kept using the term and the cleanup or the stretch, clean up in aisle 7, kind of fix the problems that were put in place over the last 4 years, which were massive. And then how long would it take to cross that kind of canyon and be on the other side of the aisle and start to see the benefits of the Trump administration's agenda? The Trump agenda and the approach has really been probably pretty accurate, suits him well, very aggressive, very sharp, very painful, but very effective, right? Like we had this massive de-risking in the markets. Everything was going to fall apart. Global trade was going to be a disaster. World GDP numbers were getting revised down. U.S. GDP numbers were getting revised down. And we had a 25% sell-off in the market. We are now, a couple of months later, at all-time highs in the S&P 500, which is completely incredible, mind-blowing. And as you said, the economic data, the broader stroke numbers are coming in mixed, but starting to look much better than expected. The one thing that has not gone away has been President Trump's press on Powell to lower rates, which you can make an argument that if you can cut rates by 50 bips in September, heading into an election with annualized CPI at over 3%, then Mr. Powell, if you're so data dependent, what is the problem right now with annualized CPI at 1% and you refusing to cut rates? Oh, yes, it's the tariffs, which are going to be inflationary. Well, I thought inflation was transitory. No, I didn't mean to say that. I'm sorry. I never should have said that. Anyway, back and forth, Powell, Trump, the feud continues. I think you can make a real case as to why the Fed should be cutting rates now. But we had the first graphic up, which you had sent in, and Trump had put out Levitt had it
classic Trump, right?
At the press conference. I mean, I love it. It is classic Trump. Yes. So what are we looking at here, EJ? We're looking at global rates for developed nations. Is that this? And where do we stand here?
Yeah, and the U.S. is basically at the bottom of the list, meaning the highest of these the key central bank interest rates. Now it varies the name, right, between central banks, but it's basically all the same thing. This is the primary interest rate that the central banks around the world are targeting. So here in the U.S. we call it the Fed funds rate. And it's basically the rate that banks are charging each other for overnight loans. And the Federal Reserve has a range on that. There's a minimum and a maximum, and they want to try to keep that rate in that range. And they do so by conducting open market operations. They do so with paying interest on reserves, with things like repurchase agreements, et cetera. So the highlighted portion at the bottom here, those are all the nations that are 4.5%, including the United States. And the kind of, chef's kiss here is Trump saying should be here at the top where he wants the rate at 1%. So what's that?
He doesn't want us with Equatorial Guinea and Cameroon. He doesn't think we should be at that level.
Yeah, so he wants us somewhere between Japan and Denmark, to be precise. It's just hilarious, the fact that we have a president who will sit down and handwrite out with a Sharpie, nonetheless, a letter like this to the man who's supposed to be at the helm of global finance. You gotta love it.
And he signs it, which I love. The signature at the end with the dot, just to say, just in case you didn't think this came. And that's not an auto pen. I actually had this checked. That was actually signed by the president of the United States. I love it. I think, when you look at the countries and who has been cutting. So since in the past year, the European Central Bank has cut, I believe, 8 times to get the rate down to 2%. And let's be clear, sovereign debt is out of control. rates are, this is all an issue. It's not to say that everybody's doing the right thing across the board and the United States is doing the wrong thing. We're all in a really bad position. Whether you go from Japan to the ECB to the EU to the United States, we're in a bad position. The question here is, how important is it for you now to cut the Fed funds rate, if for nothing else? How important is it on the financing of the debt or the rolling over of debt in the U.S.? This becomes a major issue for the government. This is the same thing as you have a credit card. You have $30,000 in credit card debt. You're a family of 5. You're drowning, and you're paying 20%. An APR of 20%. And then you get a card that comes in and says, hey, we can do it for 10% if you roll your money over. You roll your money over because you need to save some money on the servicing of that debt in order to get out from underneath the weight of that debt. Isn't that a big part of this? Isn't that a big part, the spoken, unspoken of why these Fed fund rate, why Trump is so on top of the Fed funds rate needing to come down?
Exactly, Anthony, you're spot on here. But the problem with the tremendous amount of debt that we racked up under Biden, where you not only increased the actual debt by 8 whatever trillion dollars, but then you ran down the cash account at the Treasury by another trillion. So really, that's a $9 trillion hole when you think of it that way. It's not just how much you increased debt, it's how much you decreased your cash reserves. So $9 trillion out of the, 36 that he left. So it's basically about a quarter of the debt you can say Biden was responsible for. Well, when you add that much debt in 4 years, investors are starting to lose confidence. Investors are demanding a higher yield because they're not sure if the U.S. is actually going to pay this money back, or if it is the U.S. actually going to pay it back with dollars worth anything near what they're worth today? In other words, are we going to have the implicit default of inflation? Because that's really what happened under Biden. The dollar lost 20% of its value, essentially. So yes, you're still getting your coupon payments on your Treasury bonds, but they're worth only 4/5 of what you thought they were going to be. That's pretty terrible. So the problem we're at now, Anthony, with just the sheer size of the debt and the seeming lack of any kind of stomach in DC to cut spending, is that you could very easily, if you cut the Fed funds rate today, have the situation you had last fall where the Fed cut the Fed funds rate 100 basis points right around the election because they were trying to help cackles, let's be honest. What happened to Treasury yields? They didn't go down 100 basis points. They went up 100 basis points, as you know, because investors are looking at this situation and saying, wait a second, none of the underlying reality is changing here. The math hasn't changed. The Fed is sending a different signal, and that signal is we're going to inflate the debt away. So if that's all you do is you lower the Fed funds rate, which I understand why the president wants that to happen, but if that's all you do and you don't have some other mechanism that will either decrease Treasury issuance or increase the demand for Treasuries, then you're going to see yields go in the wrong direction. It could actually make things worse, not better.
So do you think that that's part of the game here? We're going to decrease issuance and at the same time cut Fed funds rate and then see growth on the other side of the equation and kind of grow our way out of this, and reduce the amount of money that we're spending on servicing the debt and reduce overall debt? Is that kind of the path that you're looking at?
I think so, yeah, and you're going to need all sides of that. So on the growth side, as you grow the economy more, it can absorb a lot more Treasury issuance, right? So there's your demand. You got to get demand up for Treasuries because that'll get yield down, as you know. But then you also got to cut the spending so that you don't have to issue as much debt in the first place. Reducing those supply of Treasuries is also obviously going to, again, as you know, put downward pressure on yield. So if you can do it all, then you stand a chance. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, we forget the debt ceiling has been in effect this year. As soon as that's lifted, the Treasury is going to basically undo all of its extraordinary measures. It's going to have to replenish a lot of accounts, a lot of trust funds. It's going to need to borrow a lot of money just to replenish its cash account, what we call the Treasury General Account at the New York Fed. And all of this is going to mean that by sometime in September, probably, we're going to be at $38 trillion in debt. while Treasury yields across the curve, whether it's the short or the long end of the curve, all the Treasury yields seem to be converging somewhere close to 5%. Do the math, 5% on 38 trillion? You're going to be paying $1.9 trillion a year just in interest. That's not sustainable.
Yeah. 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 Well, definitely. Trump definitely sent on Truth Social, sent another message to Powell, let him know in case there was any, in case he wasn't sure where Trump stood. Called him again, too late. You should resign immediately. Fed chair should be investigated by Congress, FHFA head says. So there's definitely a push here to get Powell either to join the program and do what he needs to do to help the agenda and help the U.S. economy and the United States of America to kind of stick to his mandates and stop being so politicized, or kind of exit stage left, which probably would be ideal right now. I don't know. The rumors float about Secretary Bessent serving a dual role or possibly leaving the Treasury, going to the Fed. I guess the dual role is positive, right? It hasn't happened in about 100 years, but he could technically serve as the Fed chair and as the Secretary of the Treasury. That's correct, right?
I think so. There might be some little like nuances there, Anthony, in terms of compensation where, because of things like conflict of interest, working for a private corporation, which is what the Fed is, whereas working for, the government at the Treasury, there might be something like he'd have to waive a salary, something along those lines. But it's certainly possible. It's not outside the realm of possibility. It might be a lot for one man, especially since at Treasury, he's already had to take on more duties than what the typical Treasury Secretary has to do because of the problems at the IRS, because of the problems at FDIC, at the even things like the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. He is doing this is one of the reasons why it's so amazing how good a job he's done. He is doing much more than the average Treasury Secretary typically handles. I'd hesitate to load even more on the poor guy's plate.
Well, I'll tell you what, this is part of the beauty of Trump and not his agenda, but the way he views the world and the way he brings people into the administration, right? He's bringing in private industry professionals who have been very successful in private industry, whether it be Wall Street or industrial, whatever. They have a different view of what their max capacity is. They have a different view of what their bandwidth is, and they work in a different way. My wife and I say all the time, like, not everybody works like we work. Mm-hmm. And bringing a Secretary of the Treasury in who has done real work in the private sector and has been extremely successful, I think you get a lot more out of that individual than you would if you continue to bring on those that have only worked in the public sector and have always been paid by the taxpayers. There's definitely a difference. And I would not want to insult anyone that's been in the public sector for their career and is doing a stellar job. Good on you. I'm very happy to have you. I'm happy that I'm cutting you your paycheck, every month. But private sector work is different. You get paid based on how you perform. My old mantra is, I eat what I kill. Mm-hmm. If you eat what you kill, you become a really talented hunter, or you go by the wayside. And I think that's what we're seeing in Bessent in particular. The big, beautiful bill looks like it's going to go. It's in the House now. Hakeem Jeffries has been speaking for 385 hours consecutively. I think he's going for the record.
And he has actually convinced, believe it or not, I don't know if you saw this, he has convinced at least one Republican who was on the fence about voting for the bill. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of garbage in it, right? It's not all good. It's not the bill you or I would have written, to say the least. It's better than the alternative, but still. There were so many things that Hakeem Jeffries cited, like the fact that this bill is going to finance, millions of people getting kicked out of the country, all these illegal aliens. And a Republican congressman actually came out and said, he convinced me to vote for it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. How dare we not want illegal aliens in the country, in particular those that are breaking our laws and hurting our citizens. I don't know where we get off. I really don't. Anyway, that's another rabbit hole. So Hakeem's been up. He's getting a round of applause every so often from the Democrats that are sitting behind him, kind of toothpicks in their eyelids, trying to stay awake and chewing gum. I saw somebody eating a little bit of a snack to keep their momentum going. Round of applause here and there. It's a complete joke, and it's not
Right.
anything that hasn't been done on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
Pelosi had the record, and then I think after Pelosi, it was I forgot. I can't think of the Republican that stepped in and took. Maybe it was McCarthy stepped in and he took the record for the grandstand, and now we have Hakeem Jeffries who wants his name at the top of the list. This honestly is an absolute joke. It's embarrassing that this is what we need to do. The big beautiful bill has some great items in it, and it gets us to a point where, as far as taxes, we make permanent the 2017 tax cuts. That's great. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
Great. But then there's this spending issue, right? What are we spending on, and how much more are we increasing the debt versus not? So the things that came out of the House originally, I'm going to give it the rundown. I know you know all of this, and I'd really like to know where you think this goes and why this needed to be one big bill. Why didn't we make it the tax bill? And I know Trump wanted it done together, but maybe it would have made more sense to make the tax bill, make the tax cuts permanent, eliminate that as a consideration, and then move on to all of the additional. The House originally came out, they wanted to tighten food stamp and Medicaid eligibility. They wanted illegals off of welfare. They wanted the wind and solar subsidies gone. They wanted to tweak the student loan process, which would be a great idea. They added spending to Border Patrol and military. So all in all, it was about $150 billion cut to spending through the House. Then we go to the Senate. The Senate increases the deficit spending. They sent through the $40,000 a year SALT deduction until 2030.
Mm-hmm.
They gutted the provisions to terminate the Green New Deal subsidies and the tax credits for solar.
Yeah.
They put in spending for rural hospitals, $50 billion, when if we weren't spending the money on illegals, those that shouldn't be here, and we covered the waste, or we started to pull back the waste, fraud, and abuse within the system, we wouldn't need to spend an additional $50 billion, which is the point.
Bingo.
Again, illegal aliens off of Medicaid. They are keeping them on Medicaid now, coming out of the Senate. This I found really interesting, and I don't know if you saw this one. There was a remittance tax. So remittances, about $100 billion annually, get sent from non-U.S. citizens out to foreign countries.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's a big number. $100 billion of U.S. dollars sent out. The House had a 5% tax being put on that. Now, recently, Trump put an executive order in place in which you need to show proof of citizenship in order to remit money away, or it's a $10,000 fine to the wire agency per wire, which I love. The Senate came back and said, no, we want that to be a 1% penalty. Why would the Senate want less of a penalty for sending money by illegals out of the country, or citizen foreigners out of the country? Why wouldn't you charge them 5% to send U.S. dollars away? It benefits the country. It benefits our economy to keep that money here. If you want to send it, fine, but you owe us that 5%. The Senate said, no, it's going to be 1%. And again, tax dollars coming out of the Senate, paying for transgender surgeries, paying for abortions, the items that they throw in to kind of muddy the waters. Now, my question to you is, A, what was the benefit of not just doing tax reform? And B, if we increase the deficit by $200 billion a year here in the House, and it looks like it's going to get signed, what do we do moving forward? Are we taking a half a step back in order to take 10 steps forward? That's kind of my view. And I don't want to increase the debt on any level, but it's kind of my view that this is where we stand and we need to do this. Is it your view? So A, why not break these up? And B, is this overall, even with the debt increase and some of these ridiculous measures, can we move forward and kind of have executive orders come in and stop, for example, illegals being paid off of the welfare system, even though it's in this bill? Is that part of the plan here?
Yeah, I think so. So let's take that second one first. Look, the bill, the way it's written, it's an improvement over doing nothing, right? If you do nothing, you get a $4.5 trillion tax hike, $4 trillion of which, almost all of it, is going to fall on the American middle class starting in 2026. That's terrible. So the bill is better than doing nothing, right? Doing nothing would be catastrophic. But I feel like you're looking down the bar at 3 a.m. and you're like, is this all that's left? This is really the best we can do. And unfortunately, it apparently is in this town. Trump's got to go to war with the army he has, rhinos and all. I'm not saying I'm happy with that. I'm saying we should primary the you-know-what out of all of them so that we actually get conservatives in there, not just Republicans, but whatever the case. The bill is better than doing nothing, right? It's better than the alternative. Does the debt go up? Yes. It goes up slower than it otherwise would, right? Yes, this adds additional costs, but fewer costs than if you did nothing. Growth will be a little bit better. The deficit will grow a little bit slower. So it is making incremental improvements. There's no doubt about it. Do I wish the Senate hadn't done all of the terrible things they did? Sure. Do I wish the House had done a better job to begin with? Sure, absolutely. And this kind of, I think, then gets to your first question, which was, why on earth do one big bill? Why not break it down into two bills? The apparent calculus here, Anthony, was that if you try to do just one bill at a time, you're not going to have enough votes to really do any kind of comprehensive tax reform. And then the same thing, if you try to do a bill that has border security and military spending and all these other things, you're not going to have the votes to actually get any kind of appreciable cuts through. So the idea was, look, you have some crossover there between the two camps. So we're going to try to essentially say to people who we know are going to vote for the tax cuts anyway, look, if you don't vote yes on this bill for all of these other reforms, then you're not going to get the tax cuts you want. And likewise for people with military spending or whatever the case may be. So I'm not saying they're right or wrong, and I'm no political scientist, so my answer probably wouldn't even be worth much anyway. But I can just tell you that was the apparent calculus at play here. If we make one giant bill, it'll be easier to hobble together a coalition. And whether or not that was the right move, I'm not sure, but it's where we are today. Looks like the bill's probably going to pass the House and probably be on the president's desk by that July 4th deadline.
Okay. All right. I mean, that makes sense. It's funny to me. I was looking at, so I guess the deficit would increase by about $200 billion per year based on the bill. That's the number that I saw. So the Dems now are grandstanding, talking. Now all of a sudden they care about debt, deficit spending, right? So the number $200 billion to me sounded familiar. The number $200 billion a year now is a major number for them to increase debt. However, when Elon Musk and Doge uncover $200 billion in savings through reducing waste, fraud, and abuse, the same Dems that are screaming that $200 billion is a massive number were yelling and laughing, saying, that's all you found was $200 billion. What's the difference? We have $36 trillion in debt. So it's funny how they flip-flop depend on everything. But this one in particular, the numbers are the numbers. So on one hand, it's a big number. And on the other hand, it's a laughable number. Not really sure how they look at themselves in the mirror or how anyone in this country could look at them and take them seriously. Yeah. And let's circle back quickly to Hakeem Jeffries, who's now on hour 142. I believe he just had Taco Bell delivered to the stand, so he's eating while he's talking now.
Yeah, isn't that cultural appropriation? But no, in all seriousness, Anthony, that was such a fabulous point that you just made on the look. It's $200 billion in either case, right? Why is it peanuts here, and why is it the world's ending over here? That is a fabulous point. Context is everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Dems continue to play the game. I think we have Klobuchar up just along those lines. How they twist, how they spin, how they lie. So rather than going to Hakeem Jeffries, let's see what crying Klobuchar had to say.
What does this bill do? It kicks 16 million people off their health care. 16 million people off their health care. In order to finance tax cuts for the wealthiest, in order to give multimillionaires a $400,000 tax cut, that doesn't make the world a better place. Adding $4 trillion in debt, $1 trillion of it is interest, which is going to make mortgage rates go up. It's going to make harder for young people to be able to maybe get their first house or pay their rent. It's putting it on their backs. It's putting it on their shoulders. That's why I don't see this as a big, beautiful bill. I see this as a big, beautiful betrayal of the hardworking people of this country.
So notice how she talks about people be losing their health care, not citizens losing.
Bingo.
Notice how the $1 trillion for her is a big number, but she voted for the $1 trillion Green New Deal, which was a complete scam and destroyed, you could argue, was a major kingpin in the Biden administration and the destruction of the economy and the debt creation, deficit spending. So these numbers, these stories, I mean, it's all the same game.
Oh, exactly, Anthony. You're spot on again, especially with that, that insightful point on she won't say it's Americans who are losing their health care, right? It's just people. Well, yeah, the illegal aliens who shouldn't be here in the first place, who we're giving free health care to, who for years the Democrats have been telling us, no, we don't do that. We don't give health care to illegals. Oh, okay. Okay. Then so it shouldn't be a problem if they happen to lose that health care as we deport them. But whatever the case, you're 100% right on that. You're right on the debt. She's all of a sudden concerned that we're going to add $4 trillion in debt, but didn't care when Biden added $8 trillion. Okay. Sounds good. Thank goodness, over her strenuous objections, the bill looks like it's going to pass again. Now, I will say when it looked like that this was not going to pass, I was very, very bearish. In fact, I still maintain that, right? I think if this thing really stalls out and nothing happens here, I think markets probably get hammered. I'm going to have to be pretty bearish overall. Again, because of the consequences of what happens if we do nothing here. If we don't get a bill over the finish line and we do get that $4 trillion tax hike on the American middle class, not the wealthy, Ms. Klobuchar, the American middle class. Yeah. What's your outlook look like now, Anthony, for as we transition here over to the market? What are we looking like, and does this bill's passage today, directly or indirectly, you think, affect any of the modeling?
I think it does. It definitely affects the modeling. There's no question. I think a lot of the bill passing has mostly been discounted into the market at current levels. I think the real move would come if it didn't pass, would be a down move. I don't think that that's the likely scenario. I think that this has been discounted in. The market has run partly based on it passing, and the market will continue to hold. I guess it was about 5 weeks ago, I wrote in my morning report and shifted my view, and I called it a quote unquote normalized market once again from December, January down to the lows, and then through April and through May. I was in a high vol bear regime as I look at it. So just real quick, on top of the model, I try and determine whether or not what regime the market's in. So the market can either be high vol or low vol, and the market can either be bull or bear. This is just kind of almost like, what was it, the Punnett square that we learned in science class back in the day? So visualize it like that. And then where were we December through May? We were high vol bear. Okay, so for me, I was short flat in all positioning in equity space. And then we normalized. So we normalized back to what would be a long, short, flat, where I'm willing to be long or short or neutral, but all risk was evenly dispersed, upside, downside. And I think that's where we remain right now. So I think that the market through June and through today has recovered based on this passing. There is 100%, I will tell you, and it's scary, but there is also a major feel on Wall Street that they're expecting rates to cut. They're expecting more liquidity, and they're expecting that, again, to be the shiny ball and push S&P higher. S&P will go higher. I think that this bill passes. That's positive for the S&P. I do think that the Fed is going to cut rates. That's going to be a positive for the S&P. And I do think the models are going to be reworked on all of that. We're in a position where the push is to the upside for sure. And that's not to say that can't shift and change, but as we normalized coming out of May into June, that's been the mantra. You can see it. You can see how bullish the market is and how reluctant sellers are to sell. Just over the past few weeks, we had Israel attack Iran. The market took a 1% dip overnight in the futures. We ended up down 50 bips on the day. I mean, think about it. Israel actually attacking Iran, not just a one-off, like there was a full-fledged attack. Then the U.S. gets involved and bombs Iran. Market's up. Market hardly even flinched. I mean, it wasn't even a fart. So And that's a technical term, by the way. The market is just reluctant to go down at this point. It is risk on, and the talking heads are back. They were crying a couple of months ago and scrambling, and Jim Cramer kind of stopped throwing his stuffed animals at the screen. He actually marked the low. I think he had called for an 87 crash, and then after that call, it was like, all right, he's the contra indicator, and then market rallied. But all kidding aside, I think the bill passes. The real risk of this vote would be a no vote, and that would be to the downside. But I don't think that happens. I think the passage of the bill would not create a massive upside move from here because most of it's already been discounted in as we've rallied. And now we're starting to focus again on the Fed, and we're starting to focus on the narrative. The other thing I'll say, which I'm hearing a lot and seems like is coming into play, is the financials are in kind of the front of the pack on the lead. We have technology, communications. I think since the low is technologies, communications, industrials, and financials. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that those are the four. Okay. The deregulation of the financials is definitely in focus, and it's a Trump agenda item. And the lowering of rates as well is pushing the financials higher, and that also will be a tailwind for the market. So overall, right now, short of anything changing near term, so next 6 to 12 months, I mean, everything is supportive. The narrative is supportive. There are clearly underlying risks. We talk about them all the time. But away from those numbers right now, it looks like what the market's looking at are bullish. Will that kind of run its course in 6 to 12 months? Potentially. It doesn't. It could. It may not. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes those things resolve themselves before the market acknowledges them, and then you're off to the races again. So it's definitely, there is a tailwind there. It's in place. This bill is going to pass, and then we'll start to focus on really earnings are coming up, and the Fed. The Fed once again is the shiny ball, which I hate, but that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. The markets are addicted to those cheap rates, right? And I'd be curious to see if we keep getting jobs numbers like we got today for June, where not only do you have a good headline number, the last 2 months were revised up, not down. The unemployment rate fell, and the internals were good. Things like all of the net job growth in the month of June was full-time work. It wasn't like we're just adding part-time jobs like we did under Biden. It's not just foreign-born workers who are getting jobs. It's native-born Americans are getting the bulk of the jobs, have gotten the bulk of the jobs this year, which again is a marked change. So I'd be really curious. I mean, I think the Fed, I'm not saying they have a lot of reasons, but they certainly have a lot of excuses for not cutting interest rates right now. And I have a feeling, given the animosity between Trump and Powell, they're going to lean pretty hard on those excuses for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. If I have to bet on a horse, this is like a Mike Tyson fight back in the day. I don't care who he's fighting. It could be Powell or anyone else. But in my view, Trump is Tyson. He wins every fight. I'm glad he wins every fight because it always seems to work in our favor. Mm-hmm. If I was betting, I would bet on one way or another the Fed funds rate getting cut, and the market is kind of thinking the same thing. So whether it's Powell hitting the button, blindfolded and gagged, or whether he finally decides I'm going to do my job and not politicize myself and my position, or whether he steps aside or is replaced. I think the Fed funds rate, we're heading into a bit of a cutting cycle, and I think that's going to happen whether, Powell, comes to terms with what his real role is or not. I think rates are going to come down. So we shall see. I do know that the risk takers, the markets right now, are betting that rates come down. I know that President Trump wants rates to come down. I know that Bessent wants rates to come down. I'm going to bet that rates come down.
We shall see. We shall see, my man. It's something to, hey, look, we'll be watching, right? We're gonna keep our eye on it.
Absolutely. I will speak with you soon. I think I'm going to be down in your neck of the woods in the next couple of weeks, so I will definitely hit you up for one of those delicious drinks that we share when I'm down there. And aside from that, have a great 4th of July.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to America.
Amen, Reverend.
And I will talk to you next week.
All right. Have a happy 4th, Anthony.
Later, buddy.